Barbados me from.
You know that
Anytime Bim call me come.
246.
Jah bless the island in the sun.
Yeah, man.
Whoa, tell them Barbados we come from. Oh, what a sweet little island. Just come to the beach, get a suntan. Or ride in a van, go to Bridgetown. Tell them Barbados we come from. The sky clear blue like the ocean. Jump up in the cup over carnival. Drink some rum and play domino.
Just tell me from big up the Bayland. The catty them sweet just like candy yam. My island nice, yes, my island sweet. This Bajan music make you dance off your feet. Step off the plane, the hot sun a beat. Automatically crank, ya know me can't sleep. 246 pride and industry. Barbados, we all of it.
Barbados, this is important. Barbados is a very lovely place. It is the most English of all the Caribbean islands. It never had French, it never had Spanish. It only had English or Scottish or whatever, and African. That's it. So it developed a certain kind of thing. They call it Little Britain.
It's not surprising at all that Barbados's official language, as most former British colonies, is English. This English is tastefully flavored with their rich Bajan accent, and being a diglossic society, they also have their own Creole dialect, which is called Bajan. Bajan is not too far from English, but does have the classic Creole features, such as copula and past tense marker absence, and converting the meaning and class of words. An example of this is the use of adjectives as verbs, for example, to sweet somebody. Replacing the ends of certain vowels, such as the sound being replaced by dropping off the pluralizing phonemes is also something that will be noticed when speaking standard English. Every Barbados native can speak both, but as with most diglossic nations, they are used in different contexts and situations due to the still very present hierarchy that exists between languages and their value, ideologies of which have been tightly woven into Caribbean society following centuries of colonization. We'll touch on this a bit more in our last section. Listening to a Bajan speak, it's impossible not to hear how their historical background has shaped their language. Barbados was one of the first British colonies when they settled there in 1627 after finding that it was deserted by the previous Arawak inhabitants. Barbados's initial settlement is a bit different from most other Caribbean islands because, being deserted, the British had no opposition from indigenous peoples or competing European nations. They simply spotted the land during their expedition, which they described as the richest spot of ground in the world, and with the Crown's blessing, their settlement was financed. And they then began tobacco production and export on the island, which led to quick profits and greatly built the already formidable European economy. Whites from Britain were initially brought to Barbados as indentured servants or prisoners in some instances after being exiled. But as production demand grew, Irish and Scottish indentured laborers were also transported to the island. As one can imagine, with business being this lucrative, the cost of white labor would also rise to meet the demand. It is said that it is at this time Britain took the gracious advice of their Dutch and Sephardic merchant counterparts and set their sights on West Africa as a means of cheap and efficient manpower. According to figures from Winford, there were 37,200 European laborers and 6,000 African slaves in Barbados in 1642, so the African slaves were quite outnumbered. Working and living in close proximity to the white laborers, of course, they commonly made contact during these times. Boasting the largest white population of all the Caribbean colonies, one would assume that Barbados was primed for language acquisition, but it must be noted that there were differing European natives present, and also, being members of the lower class, their English was a non-standard dialect, not standard English. Within the Caribbean, Bajan is known to be one of the lighter Creole varieties though, as its grammar is not too far off from standard English. This is said to be due to the large number of whites that were on the island. From the mid-17th century to the mid-20th century thereabouts, Britain discovered that sugar production was the most profitable of all, and in their conquest for even greater economic growth, they of course began to plant sugarcane. Sugarcane production, however, is much more demanding than the small crops that they had been cultivating before then, so this resulted in them enslaving even more Africans in order to meet the high-scale demand. During this time in Barbados, the Africans now outnumbered the European laborers, many of whom had left or moved up to roles such as overseers. Being in a foreign land for such a long time had led to acculturation of varying degrees, so Africans communicated in their own versions of the broken English that they had acquired amongst themselves and the whites that surrounded them. It is said that even the white laborers had taken on the lisping language of the Negroes. This is what led to Creole formation or Creolization, as they restructured the English they were exposed to, which is notably broken English, as it is said that even amongst the higher class of whites on the island, only a small percentage of them actually spoke standard English. Their acquired and innovated version of the local English, Creole, was then passed on to the newly born or newly arriving slaves on the island, who in their time did not have as much close contact with Europeans. Being influenced by the Irish, Scottish, British, and Africans, it is now clear why Barbados has a strange mix of a Caribbean accent with an European twang.
This year, gonna get any smoother. Now I'm out of sandpaper, now I'm out of scrubbing me down like a pot with coconut hot and malt can't make me change. They can't put the barber green on this and smooth it out. I can forever be rough. That's where they say start from. So if you want to think that, oh, I can calm down, there's reasons I want to know in this video why it's so. You understand? But
okay. Whoever taught you was hello?
well taught.
Oh my gosh.
Who was you taught by?
Yo, what's up, P, man? I don't know who taught you.
Who were you taught by?
Yeah, who was you taught by? Hello?
Huh?
Who was you taught by?
Some of the greatest historians and teachers out that I went to school with, okay? And teachers that teach me, not teachers up here, teaching when all.
The man going to the States. The man going to the big man joining. Just two brothers going on a trip to see them and except that he's the uglier brother, Exhibit A. Big man start recording me now? Big man. Two people that look like Ninja Man and friend their love child that was there said they don't know scratch off when they see your face. Any comments? I tell you start recording me.
There was one white Barbados native who credited the features of Bajan Creole, such as spelling out R's and dropping TH's, to their Scottish and Irish influence, but stated that all the bad things about Bajan, such as its bad grammar and overall crudeness, is due to the obviously uneducated Africans who were anatomically incapable of speaking the Queen's English. Furthermore, he also made reference to the Africans tarnishing the white indentured laborers' speech from them being in such close contact, which caused them to adopt their uneducated ways. Now that we have traced Barbados's linguistic influences by delving a bit into their history, We can wrap up by examining their language and their attitude to said language thousands of years after its contextualization. As we stated earlier, diglossia exists in Barbados. This means their standard English and Bajan Creole coexist and are used by everyone, but under different conditions and situations, as is seen as a higher variety than the other. As a result of the perceptions of these languages, a person's use of language in Barbados is often used as a marker for their social stratification and identity. From an interview conducted with Zoe, a Bajan influencer, it has been confirmed that Bajan Creole is reserved for social or informal situations, while Standard English is used at work, for job interviews, and in school. The situations that Bajan Creole is reserved for clearly portrays that in Barbados it is viewed as the lesser language variety. Zoe has also confirmed that when in school, if a student addresses the teacher in Bajan Creole or speaks it among themselves, they are reprimanded for using brawling, improper, unfit speech. With the existence of such social standards, people in Barbados must be mindful of their use of language, as the wrong tongue in the wrong situation has social implications such as embarrassment or being excluded from opportunities and jobs due to being perceived as unfit, unprofessional, or uneducated because of your broken speech. This is not to say Bajans are completely ashamed of their dialect though, as it definitely is cherished for its vivacious, easy-flowing nature. They have, however, mastered the art of code switching in order to retain their respectful social standing. It is these properties of Bajan that have, however, caused it to now be acceptable and even desired in certain occupations, primarily tourism and entertainment, which is understandable, as these fields don't necessarily require the highest amount of seriousness or professionalism. Instead, these persons have to be charming, charismatic, energetic, and humorous, all of which are closely associated with Bajan. This is why, in social settings, persons will switch to Bajan, as it is a richer and more expressive language, so it makes jokes sweeter and the mood lighter. These perceptions have without a doubt been cemented into Caribbean society since slavery. From a study conducted by sociocultural and linguistic anthropologist Janina Fenixon with 74 Barbados natives, it has been observed that Bajan is commonly associated with the African slaves, plantation labor, lack of education, backwardness, and low social status. In contrast, Standard English is seen as proper, professional, and is an indicator of high class and status. Interestingly, from the interviews conducted with Afro-Bajan natives, they expressed teaching their children that they should speak proper English in order to better themselves, get good jobs, and remove themselves from poverty. This was also a desire of theirs because they want their children to be seen as respectable members of society and bring pride to the family. Speaking with a raw Bajan accent and in the Bajan dialect, however, would bring shame to them, as their child would be seen as a planter or cultivator. So it seems farmers are seen as uneducated persons who are not able to do better. This seems to be closely linked to slavery, where the Africans were taken from their land and forced to cultivate for the Europeans. It may be that after working so hard to overcome slavery and take over jobs, that were historically held by the whites, a parent of African ancestry's biggest shame is for their child to take an evolutionary step back and return to tilling the soil from which their ancestors had long left behind.